All right, so let me introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt DeFanis, and I am one of the most unlikely people to be teaching this in this space, and here I am. I ended up, and Renaya is one of our regular volunteers when she is not away at college. So I have been going to Pilgrim for just over 3 years. I've done a variety of tech-related stuff in the predominantly white church that I grew up in. And then once I got here, after I'd been here for a few months, started getting involved in the tech ministry. But that was in 2021 when churches were just starting to come back to in person. And I had, just as luck would have it, because I'm a nerd, I'm a tech nerd for all sorts of different things, a totally different church, also not a place that I was a member of or had been affiliated with, had asked me for help getting virtual church services up and running during the pandemic. So I actually had a lot of tech booth experience in a church context, but I had also had virtual church service experience. And back then we were piecing together the services and then streaming them mostly pre-scheduled. When I started coming to Pilgrim had, and I already had developed a pretty good live streaming workflow. The church I was helping out, United Methodist Church of Mahomet, we transitioned from pre-recorded assets to actually doing church live, but streamed, no attendees. So I had gotten to the point of developing a really good workflow for that. Well, when I started coming here, Pilgrim had already invested in some equipment and some resources for live streaming. They hadn't gotten it all together yet. There were a lot of puzzle pieces to connect, but they knew that they wanted to make that happen. Now, for those who may listen to this recording later and can't see me, I am a white dude, and I have a lot of experience being white. I've been white for my entire life. So if you put yourself in my shoes, and I had visited a couple other black churches before, but when I landed here, it didn't occur to me I was never going to leave. And there was just this, I was just awestruck by the intensity of the worship experience in the space. And then as I started getting involved with the tech here and then realized, oh, well, they've already taken steps to get this going, but I have to figure this out. And we'll talk about this. The biggest issue to figure out, video's easy. You'll see that. Video's easy. The biggest issue to figure out was the audio. And I was so awestruck by the intensity and the emotional charge when you're in these spaces. And so you'll see that's a lot of what drove me to, I want to get this right. And by right, I want to get it so that somebody who can't be here in person gets as close to that experience as we possibly can. So it became a very personal mission, and there was a lot of nerding out that went along with it. Pastor Parks didn't know me well at all, and as I was trying to figure out the audio angles on all of this, I had to meet him here to get access to the building during the work week, and at some point I'm thinking, this man has got to wonder what on earth I am doing rooting around in all of the wiring of this sanctuary for all these weeks before we got anything up and running. So, oh, this does work, it's just not working well. All right, so why do we bother with this? The technology in general isn't worth doing if it's not going to do one of these things. It's got to help us advance our mission as a church. It's got to increase our impact. It's got to be able to save cost, or it's got to be able to save time. It has to do some combination of those things, or else it's not worth doing. The centerpiece of most of our black churches is organ hardware that is literally not even manufactured anymore and hasn't been for decades. So we are operating on incredible retro technology that is literally never going to be made again. No point doing this if it's not advancing the mission. So we got to make sure before you do anything that I end up talking about this week, is it justified? Can we justify it with one of those ways? So going back to the story I told of wanting to get this right, my live streaming mission, for me, as I looked at this project of how can I tackle this, how can I get this right, I wanted to faithfully capture and reproduce the sights and the sounds, and most importantly, the spirit of the worship experience that happens in these physical spaces, so that remote participants will enjoy an experience that is as close as possible to actually being there. And one of the biggest attractions to being in the space is the sound of the voices from the choir and is the sound of a Hammond organ as produced by a Leslie speaker. And those are not things that are going to capture themselves. So there is some work involved in that. But this is what drives doing this right. This is the reason, in my estimation, why it's important enough to replace the iPad connected to Wi-Fi that's sitting in the aisle. That's easy. And not only is it easy, but it's actually a pretty good quality video capturing device. Modern smartphones and iPads have great cameras in them, so they're pretty decent. So we lost another one, huh? See you, Renaya. So here's the basic. Here's the basic setup. And I think everybody comes from a congregation where you're doing this or better. But it's basically set a smartphone or a tablet up on a tripod and have somebody move that around or aim it a little bit as you go through the service. And the advantages are it's simple. It's inexperience. It does not require really any technical knowledge. It's super easy to get anybody to say, hey, just point it in the direction of whoever's talking or singing. And as I said earlier, the current generation of tablets and smartphones, the video quality is pretty good. Pretty good or even better than pretty good. Now the drawbacks, audio quality is going to be far, far, far worse because you're not able to have that tablet or smartphone grab audio that has come through your mixing console. Video quality is not going to be as good as any sort of a dedicated video capture device. So whether that's a really cheap $250, $300 consumer level camcorder, and certainly anything more sophisticated than that, any sort of purpose-built video device, because after all, you don't have the pastor in the pulpit with the tablet here on the edge of the pulpit. Usually it's several feet away, several being 20, 30. So any sort of a purpose-built video device is going to get you better video quality because you're able to zoom in, get a tighter frame, make sure that the talking head or singer or whoever is being featured actually fills the screen and is engaging to look at. You can't switch between different cameras or different inputs. That's a big limitation. And when you see, hopefully, during the rest of our hour together, when you see how easy it is to actually accomplish that, it becomes oh man, I wish we had done this sooner. Because multi-cameras is huge. Wi-Fi and cellular, if you're using a tablet, you're not hardwired into an Ethernet connection. So that means that you are subject to all of the variability of wireless technology. And it also means one too many people sitting in those pews downloading a movie or a game means that your live stream isn't going to work because you're competing with that bandwidth. And that's a very real issue. So you have that as well. So if we go to the more advanced setup, and these are the cornerstones of it, because most everything else that is needed, you already have. We did here at Pilgrim, and Pilgrim already had bought the video switcher. So that was already here. So the advantages, you get drastically better video quality. You can do this on a pretty modest budget. Not for less than at least a couple $1,000s, but you can do a lot with a couple $1,000s and have it be a quantum leap over a tablet or a smartphone. And of course, the flagship tablets and smartphones with the best cameras are going to be $1,000 to $2,000 anyway. It will allow multiple cameras. It will allow PowerPoint to be used as a video source. So when we want to be able to make sure the live stream viewer can see whatever the scripture is that's being read, we hit that button, and the viewers remotely are seeing exactly that. So we have that as opposed to a tablet trying to zoom in on a screen that's partially faded out from ambient light. So you get to be able to add your slide deck right into the mix seamlessly. You can route your mixing console output into the live stream, and that makes a huge difference in audio. I will remind you all, that is where I spent the most time trying to figure this out and troubleshoot it, but it also means that now that I have conquered that, I'm in a good spot to be able to answer questions and help other churches do it. In fact, Cook and I first met because of a live streaming tutorial that I did for a delegation from Salem. So I'm in a good spot to be able to answer questions because I have worked out most of these kinks here. You have hardwired internet connectivity because what's driving it is this video switcher, which is actually connected to an Ethernet cable, so it's hardwired. In most cases, you hopefully want your church's networks. There's a separate guest network, and their bandwidth, whatever they're doing, is not going to eat up bandwidth needed for live streaming. I will say, I think here at Pilgrim, we did need to increase the internet package. It doesn't use a ton of bandwidth to live stream in 1080p, but it does need to have plenty of available bandwidth, that continuous use of 6, 7, 8 megabits per second upstream. When you're looking at internet packages, they're normally giving you downstream because people are downloading, watching movies, but the upstream is what matters for live streaming, and it has to be stable. But you have to make sure that people on their smartphones surfing the web on the church's Wi-Fi isn't taking away your bandwidth. But you get the benefit of much, much more stable, hardwired connectivity. So the drawbacks, it's more expensive. Not by much, doesn't have to be by very much at all, but it is somewhat more expensive. It is somewhat more complex, but once it is set up, it's incredibly easy. You have a very easily repetitive workflow. The service that we use here that's widespread among houses of worship is called Boxcast, and you'll see a little bit of an explanation of that later. Because it is so easy to repeat the process of come in here, flip the switch, turn it on, make it go, really the only part of the actual scheduling of a live stream is that I have to log on to a website and tell Boxcast, expect to live stream at this time, and here's what it's going to be. I have been all over the country when Sister Parks has texted and said, hey, we've got either a special event, a Bible study, or a funeral, or a wedding, any of those things that people want live streamed. Can you make that happen? Yeah, I hop onto a website, do the scheduling, and once I've done that, which only takes a few seconds, I did it for this tonight before we started, all somebody has to do, go into that booth, and there's an on-air button, a red button at the top right corner of that device, hit on air, turn on the cameras, you're in business. So don't let the complexity, don't let me bog you down in the technical complexities of the setup if that's not what you're going to be doing. You find a couple people who can deal with the complexities of the setup, but Renaya is a regular volunteer. Kayla, who I showed you on the opening slide, once I got all this stuff set up, I realized, no, wait a minute, I travel quite a lot, and I'm literally the only person here who knows how to run this. That's not sustainable. And so I quite literally started snatching teenagers out of their pews. And I just said, just come back here and stand. You don't have to do anything at all. Just stand back here and watch. And at the end, when I had grabbed Kayla and her brother Xavier, they just stood there for a service, watched me do what I do. And I said, no pressure. It's okay if you're not interested. But are you interested and you think you can do this? Got a one-word answer from Kayla. Yep. And in eighth grade, I got to watch her within just a few weeks get her brain. It's like watching a pianist who can play by ear. I just got to watch her brain wrap around this set of tasks. And so on any given Sunday, you will find Kayla with her right hand operating 3 different camcorders and with her left hand toggling between the different inputs on the video switcher. And she's not even thinking about it. She just does it. Not only that, Kayla, who's now 16, recruited another classmate of hers, another teenage girl, who Kayla did the training and the supervising. And so some Sundays you'll find Kayla standing against the wall watching her classmate Cameron do the very same thing. Right hand operating the camcorders, left hand operating the input. It is very repeatable. It's very easy to operate once it is set up, and it is not that hard to set up. Also, once it is set up, because we're not using the tablet, we're streaming hardwired to a service. The service can then be told to then live stream to multiple destinations. So Boxcast, and again, I got a slide coming up about Boxcast, but Boxcast, I go to that website, and that's where I tell it, are we live streaming this to YouTube? Are we live streaming it to Facebook? If it is, if you're doing a special service, if you're combining services with Friends and Family Day, and we got a combined service, and I want to live stream from this building to Salem's page, we can do that. If I want to live stream it to somebody's personal timeline because it's their loved one's funeral, I can do that. That doesn't require but a few seconds of extra work. Somebody else may need to put in their Facebook credentials, but it only takes seconds to set up. So we can do all of that stuff. These are the components. These are the pieces. So very simple flow chart. You see 3 different cameras, actual cameras, covering 3 different things that go into this device. And that's what the big buttons on the bottom left are, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, for most configurations, 1, 2, and 3 are different camera angles. Number 4 happens to be PowerPoint. Okay, so just if you're watching just like a small broadcast studio, whenever you want to switch camera angles, just hit a different button and it brings it up. Here, camera 1 is the one that follows the action. That's the expensive camera. It also has a zoom remote control, so you'll see the operator able to not only follow the action, if Pastor Parks decides he wants to do laps or start pew climbing, which he is sometimes known to do, right, not only, right, and he'll invariably do it after he's complained about having sacrificed his knees to the National Football League, and then I'll see him doing pew surfing. But anyway, we're able to follow the action around the room and also with one hand operate a little zoom toggle remote control. So that's the camera that follows the action, camera 1. Camera 2 is one that we move from one shot to another a few times during the service. But for example, camera 2 is the fixed shot that has the entire choir, or the fixed shot that has the instrumentalist, or maybe will it go from the back of the organ to the choir. But that's camera number 2. It shows a particular thing, but we're not moving it around constantly. Camera 3 is super simple. It's the wide shot. It just shows the whole room. And we want that because if there's action in the room, if everyone is standing up, if Pastor Parks is pew surfing, or if we just want to get the audience reaction to something, then we go to camera 3 because we're trying to make sure that those remote viewers are getting as close to that experience in the room as we possibly can. And so that was one of those things that I had to teach anyone who's learning the cameras is put your head in the position of somebody watching at home or on their mobile device. They can't see. Talking head gets real boring if Pastor Parks is referring to other stuff that's happening in the room, or we're back there with, our panoramic view and we see stuff happening, but we don't show the viewer. So 3 different camera angles, and number 4 is just PowerPoint. Also built into this, and this is a $200 and some device, this video switcher. It's insane. This would have been science fiction 10 years ago. But you hit picture in picture if you want to make sure the talking head is able to be displayed over the PowerPoint slide. So that's commonly going to be the pastor, picture in picture over the corner of a sermon slide or a scripture slide, or when we're running through the announcements and the announcement person is standing right here, we got a tight shot of the person reading the announcements over the announcement slide. And not only will it do picture-in-picture with the press of a button, but if we realize, I've got that head floating over an important piece of the slide, there's buttons you can see kind of right there, just right of the center at the top. You can move the picture-in-picture to whichever corner of the screen you want. All of that is just right there. It's very simple to do. When you're putting these systems together, based on what I just described from what we do with the 3 different cameras, here's the quick description of what the cameras probably should look like. Camera number 1, this needs to be the nicest camera for a couple of reasons. It's the one where you're following the action with it. It also, in the case of this room and in many of our auditoriums, the cameras may be relatively far away from the stage. It's got to have a long enough zoom on it that when you zoom it all the way in, it will still tightly frame up somebody in the pulpit or somebody all the way up here and get a nice tight head and shoulders shot. After all, if it's a talking head, we want to be able to see the facial expressions. We want to do our best so that those remote viewers are as close to the in-person experience as possible. So camera 1 needs to be the nice one. Larger image sensor is important because most of these churches, this one, we get a lot of light that bounces around because of the light-colored walls, but a lot of the church sanctuaries aren't terribly bright. More expensive cameras have larger image sensors, which will handle lower light a bit better. And this is the one and the only one that really should have professional audio. So a proper XLR microphone style jack, 2 of those on it. Basically anything above $1,500, $2,000 will have the pro audio. because the audio that I have coming out of the soundboard goes through camera 1, and from camera 1 goes into that video switcher. Camera 2, this doesn't need the pro audio, so it can be much cheaper. It also doesn't have to zoom in as far. As I told you, camera 2 is usually sort of a medium shot, getting the whole choir, getting the entire instrumentalist orchestra pit, that sort of thing. So it doesn't have to have as long a zoom lens, doesn't have to be as nice. So those, ideally, you still want it to be a good quality image. So ideally, you're going to spend $500 to $1,500 on camera 2. Camera 3, that could dang near be a disposable consumer camera off the shelf at Walmart. What did I say camera 3 does? Has really one job and one job only. It just sits there and gets the wide view of the room. So it can be very inexpensive, like $250. I wouldn't literally order a $129 one from Amazon that's a no-name brand, but you can get, a decent Sony for $250. So those are the roles of the cameras and the descriptions of what you should be looking for. I have specific product recommendations that are in the slide deck. If you use the QR code at the beginning, you can download the slide deck, and I believe the hyperlinks to the specific products are live in that. You can buy used. You don't need 4K. We're not streaming in 4K. This equipment isn't even capable of it. And even if we had the ability, very few people are watching in 4K, and it would require a lot more bandwidth. So we don't need the latest and greatest necessarily. You could get something that's several years old. The two nicer cameras back there are mine. I already owned them. But the one in the middle, camera 2, it's over 10 years old. It's 10, 11 years old at least. And it's great. It's still got a 1-inch sensor. It does a beautiful job for what we need it to do. So get used stuff if you want. There are vendors like B&H Photo Video, bhphoto.com, that have used departments that sell warranted, returnable used products, and they have a scale on the condition. So they're highly reputable, and if they say it's an 8 on a 10-point condition scale, you'll know it is 100% functional and literally just shows signs that it's been touched. So bhphotovideo.com is a great vendor that also includes used options. If you're watching used options because stock, what's in stock will change from week to week, it's one of those things to watch over a period of time. Here's a specific sample product. This is camera 1 back there. Remember the things I said it needs? It needs the larger sensor to be more light sensitive. It needs to have good professional quality audio interface. This one happens to have easy manual adjustment. So if we need to bump the exposure up or down, because in this room, because we have a lot of daylight, quite honestly, the sun coming out from behind the clouds can all of a sudden mean that an image that was exposed properly is overexposed. So depending on the room setting, you may need to have easy access to things like adjusting the exposure a little bit. You do want, by the way, to be somewhat intentional with manual exposure if you happen to have spotlighting. Spotlighting, if you are using a cheap camera in auto exposure mode, will cause the subject that's in the spotlighting to be way overexposed. So you need something good enough quality that it's not going to overexpose. 20 times optical, keyword optical. Lots of consumer devices will give much, much bigger numbers than that, but that includes a digital zoom. Digital zoom is nothing more than cropping in on the pixels, the limited number of pixels you have, to extend the perceived magnification. In other words, when you exceed what the optical zoom does, you're destroying the quality. So it has to have a good optical zoom, otherwise the quality suffers. So this one does that. It will go just long enough to get a really nice tight shot. And this particular camera also happens to go out pretty wide, although most of what we're doing with that one is pretty far on the telephoto end. It also has, remember, camera 1 is the one that chases the action. We're almost never zooming while we're on camera, while it's on the stream, if it's camera 2 or camera 3. We switch to those after we've pointed the camera at what we want. We're never zooming. Camera 1 is chasing the action. That's frequently zooming. So this particular model happens to have a nice variable zoom, and an $89 remote control means that you put it right on the tripod handle, and you can pan and tilt and zoom all with one hand all at the same time. and gentle pressure will result in this really slow creeping effect that you wouldn't even notice. So the most common example of the creeping zoom that we would use is, as I quickly pointed out to the teenagers, and once I did, they completely got it because they all rotate into the choir. We don't want to have Pastor Parks on a shot wide enough that some poor person in the choir who isn't aware of it is on Pastor Parks' shot for the entirety of the church service. Whatever they're doing, nose blowing, whatever, whispering, checking their phone, any of that, that person does not expect to be broadcast to the world doing any of those things. And so we want to be able to very gently reframe, get the shot just slightly tighter and not have it be jarring. And so that variable speed zoom lets you do all of that stuff and make it look really smooth. And then lastly, it has to have some sort of a plug-in for a zoom remote control. Most professional camcorders do, but that's called, the technical term is that LANC input. This camera is a $4,000 one. You can get stuff that does everything you need for as low as about $2,200, brand new. Brand new. Some of what makes that one expensive are technologies for how it records. We're not recording in the cameras. We're just flipping them on and using them to provide a signal. Camera 2. This is one for, I said 500 to 1,500. I found one for $463. This one does not have a 1-inch sensor, but it's still going to be good enough. And if you want to get a $1,500 or $2,000 one with a 1-inch sensor, that's great. You don't have to keep them in the same brand family. One possible advantage, odds are the color is going to tend to look consistent across that. But we've got multiple brands of cameras back there, a Panasonic, a Sony, and I think a Canon. So none of ours are the same, and the color can be balanced close enough. But there's an example of a camera 2 for $463. Camera 3, this is the cheapest quality name brand camera I found on B&H, $230. So that's camera 3, and remember, the only real criterion is it has to be wide enough to get the wide view of your room. Now you may be, depending on how far back you are or how far up you are, you may actually be zooming in from the wide end a little bit so you don't have more than you want. For example, I don't want all of the light fixtures and the projector, but I do want to get the wide view of the room, and since this room has the large mural, I want the wide shot to include the mural. So there's an example of a camera 3 for very, very little money. This is the video switcher, and there's really not like I'm recommending a product family like buy this one. This is the one to have. It is very, very common in the space. Even if we had $10,000 cinema cameras, this would still be the video switcher to have. $230. And it's ridiculous what it can do and how easily and how quickly it can be learned. So 4 inputs, which we talked about. Everything that we need to do on a typical Sunday morning, everything, there is a direct button for it. 90% of what we do when we're operating it is touch one of the buttons 1, 2, 3, or 4. Most of the rest of the 10% are hitting on air or off, or picture-in-picture on and off to pop the announcer or pastor's head over the PowerPoint slide deck. So direct controls for everything. It has a versatile app-based setup, so I can configure a bunch of other stuff on it. So there were some audio configuration items that I did on it one time, but I haven't been in the app to touch any of that in probably over a year. So it has even more flexibility there, but what's important is once you have this up and running, the stuff that you would actually need to touch and feel is right there on something extremely simple. Anything any bigger, anything more expensive is going to have more buttons, take up more space, be more confusing, and won't actually improve the live stream quality at all. How many of you have actually ever checked out the Pilgrim live stream on a decent quality screen? Yeah? Yeah, I mean, it's like, and one of the things I tell the teenagers, and Renee is back there when she's in town, but it's like, I'll sit there with my iPad on a cellular connection to monitor it via YouTube so I can see what's going on. So if something terrible happens, I'll be watching it on YouTube with the volume down. But it's amazing. Like I'm telling teenagers, we have no business being able to produce something that looks and sounds this perfect. It's really pretty exciting, and this is really the guts of it. This is, in fact, I told Cameron on Sunday, I said, your nice fingernails are going to be featured in our presentation. But that's 16-year-old Cameron's nails from a few weeks ago. But that's what I'm talking about. So this is the view from back in our booth here. And you're seeing Cameron holding the handle to be able to move the camera around. The nicest camera, because it's the one that's being moved all the time. It does need to be on a decent, what's called fluid head video tripod. A decent one, not a real cheap Walmart something or other. But with that, with one hand, with the tension set the way it's supposed to, she can smoothly move the camera up or down, left, right, and zoom, and just do it all at once with one hand. And because that can all be done with one hand, she can be switching video sources with the other one. But I consider that a must-have accessory for as cheap as it is, $89. So this is a slightly different version of that flow chart. This one actually points button by button to what the cameras do, and it has the actual cameras 1, 2, and 3 by the model that I gave you as samples. So when somebody is running it, that's what buttons 1, 2, 3, and 4 are going to do. They toggle between those 4 devices, 3 cameras, and whatever is coming out of PowerPoint. This is what the video switcher outputs. So we have an LCD monitor back there that sits on the ledge of the booth. That's what it looks like. It is like a miniature video production studio, and so you all can see what I just described. Camera 1 follows the action. So there you see down on the middle, kind of running across the middle of the screen, you see camera 1 is the tightest one. We've zoomed in tight on our subject. That happened to be Shia doing a solo on Sunday. You see camera 2, that's exactly what I said earlier. It's a fixed shot that covers the entire choir. So camera 2 was just sitting there, not being moved around. That was its fixed shot. Camera 3, there you see the wide shot that I'm talking about. And camera 4 is the PowerPoint output. What do you notice about the PowerPoint output? It's not a slide. What is it? It's to Shia. It's actually camera 1. Yeah, fun fact, Sister Parks came to me. I guess every once in a while somebody will just decide Matt needs a nerd challenge. And so she came to me several weeks ago, said, Pastor Parks wants us to be able to get what amounts to a Jumbotron, which is we want to be able to get what we're shooting up on the screen when we want it. And I'm in full nerd mode. I'm in problem solving mode. I'm online doing research. I'm trying to come up with hardware solutions and adapters and repeaters. And actually, as it turns out, on top of all the other things that video switcher will do, a $5 USB-C cable connected from the switcher back into the computer makes the computer treat that as a webcam. And current versions of PowerPoint will let you embed a live webcam feed into the slide deck you're presenting from. I know, exactly. So what that really means in real life when we want Jumbotron, and good examples would be, it could be the pastor, but at least he's elevated, and so everyone can see the pulpit here. Where it's way more useful is room is full. People are on their feet. Praise dancers, some of whom are much shorter than me, on the floor, and you can't see all of them. We're in a good perch. Our camera can see them. Camera 1's tracking the action. So all we have to do in PowerPoint is, while we're in the middle of the service, go to the slide sorter view where you can see the thumbnails of all your slides, and we just keep one in the deck every Sunday that just has a live webcam view embedded. And so we just go to slide sorter view, hit the webcam slide, boom, instant Jumbotron. Cost an extra $5 to make that happen. I'd done so much research only to realize, really, I could just add a USB cable, boom, done. But yeah, so that's why on this shot, camera 4, which is the PowerPoint computer, it is PowerPoint that you're seeing on that camera 4 box. It just happened that at that moment, we had Shia on the Jumbotron. Then the other things that this shows is at a glance, down at the bottom row, on air. I know that we're on. I know it's connected, has established a connection with the Boxcast server. That's where the data goes. Boxcast then turns around and sends that wherever I've told Boxcast to send it. But I can tell at a glance, we're okay. We are on air. It's a very simple thing, but the most common mistake is somebody forgets to hit the on button at the beginning of the service. But yeah, on air. It'll show me if there's a problem, if there's a network issue. Every once in a while we have had to unplug or restart stuff, but it'll show me at a glance if that's working. And then on the right, that shows me audio. And really what I care about is just the one on the far right program. That's already a mix that I have crafted coming out of the soundboard. I'm just adjusting volume on a few things to make sure it doesn't clip, but also to make sure that the quieter parts of the service are still nice and loud on a live stream. Obviously, we expect if we're in this space, we all know it gets intense. And we also know that at times it's much quieter if one person is talking or one person is praying. And in the space, our ears and our brains can adapt to this huge, huge range of sound. But if you're listening on your smartphone speaker, and even more so if you happen to be watching it on a smart TV with a sound bar, you don't want somebody to get their shout on and knock you out of your chair, right? That has to be contained, but also the quieter portions have to be brought up, so there's a limit there. That's called compression, and everything that's broadcast on television is highly compressed. We do the same thing here. And so I'm able to see at a glance, we do tweak volume and we tweak the mix, but I'm basically just looking to make sure that we're staying in the yellow or slightly into the red range without hitting the ceiling. That's it. To use a totally non-technical term, we just need to not be hitting the ceiling. Boxcast, I told you, is what we use to simulcast. So that can go to several different destinations, but that's the flow chart. The device itself, the ATEM Mini Pro video switcher is programmed in the software. Where am I sending this? So only one time did I have to tell it in a software app, you're sending it to Boxcast, here's the stream key for Boxcast. Once I know it's going to Boxcast, then the only thing I have to do is hit on air and tell Boxcast what it's doing with stuff. Today, I'm not going live to YouTube or anywhere else. It's going to Boxcast just so Boxcast can record it, and I can then either rebroadcast it if I want to, or go into Boxcast and download a video file of it and then make it available on Dropbox if somebody wanted to see, hey, I heard Matt's class was amazing. Where could I possibly see that replayed? So I can do that in addition to the live streaming capability. Here's the basics of it. It acts as an intermediary, Boxcast does. It sits there in the middle. Nobody is going to Boxcast to watch the service. Boxcast is where it goes to be rebroadcast, and that's where I tell it where I want it to go. It also means it's possible, like I have a software solution on my computer. I told you I'm a serious hardcore nerd. And like when I have done the live stream for Pilgrim from Decatur months ago, I did that using my computer, not that switcher. But that requires, if I want to live stream from a computer to Facebook and to YouTube, however much bandwidth it was going to take, it's going to take twice that much or 3 times that much. Boxcast means one stream, one high-quality stream with one consistent amount of bandwidth, and then it will take care of however many other streams I want. So that also helps ensure consistency of quality and lets you do more with limited bandwidth. Also, if you ever were doing something remotely or tethered to a smartphone Wi-Fi hotspot, again, not exceeding that bandwidth is a huge deal. Lastly, and this has actually been semi-automated in Boxcast just recently. It's a beta feature. I get to sit back there most weeks and just experience these services unfolding. And I'm sure many of you have gone home after a really good Sunday service and thought, here's the part that stayed with me, or here's that moment, or if I could share with a friend and like just let the friend be teleported right into the space that I was in. Here's the 30 seconds or 60 seconds, either some amazing solo or musical performance or just a really important moment from the pulpit, any of those things. Because Boxcast is ingesting this stuff and saving it as part of the subscription plan, you can go in, or you can train somebody in your congregation to go in and say, here's the highlight part. Here's the equivalent of our highlight reel. Or here's the highlighted segment of the week that I now want to distribute separately during the week on Instagram or on Facebook. Make sense? Because that's a lot easier. If you have one particular thing, rather than sharing it and saying, go to 43 minutes and 27 seconds, or listen to 43 minutes to get to the thing I want to show you, you're just going straight to the highlights. This is what it looks like. When I go to schedule something, I'm logging in. When I log in, I just tell it, what's my video source? What resolution do I want? And then down, as we go down, scroll down, where is it going from here? Is it and from Pilgrim's case, it's going to Pilgrim's Facebook page. It's going to Pilgrim's YouTube channel. And I could just as easily, as I said, enter additional destinations or somebody else's Facebook page. In fact, once or twice when I was first getting this going, I accidentally had Pilgrim's service live streamed to my personal Facebook timeline. Last thing we're going to talk about before we call it a night for tonight's session is the audio for video. And that's really, next slide, it's really the most important part. The most important part. Obviously, if you have the budget, you can drop several $1,000s on really good quality camcorders to make sure you can get that tight shot that if somebody is watching on an 80-inch smart TV at home is going to look just amazing. It'll look every bit as good as Anderson Cooper does at the anchor desk, except more melanated in the case of Pilgrim. But every bit as good. So that was a joke, everyone. So it'll look amazing, but what really counts here? How good does it sound? Imperfect video can be overlooked. Your smartphone and your tablet will get at least okay video. And most people are watching it on a very small screen. Most of our viewers are on mobile devices and tablets. Very few of them are watching on 85-inch 4K smart screens. So video is actually not that important. And remember, one of those 4 video sources is the slide deck coming out of the PowerPoint computer. That's not even coming out of a camera. The audio is more important. And that's the biggest limitation of the tablet sitting on the tripod in the aisle in the sanctuary, besides the fact that people can kick it and knock it over and other things like that. But the audio is what is most important. It can be, at best, hard to listen, uncomfortable to listen. At worst, it's just unlistenable or actually painful. Whereas if we do this right, you're getting, with equipment you already have. All of us have some sort of a mixing console already. That was one of the other challenges. I want to make this work, I want to get the audio right, and I don't want to end up with any new equipment, other than a couple of new microphones to capture the audio from things we didn't previously have to mic up in the room. So, audio reinforcement, that's what you're all used to hearing. Somebody's operating a soundboard, or not. It may have been set already and not actively operated. But what we're doing is we're selectively amplifying. In most of our sanctuaries, you got a Leslie speaker that gives you all of the organ that you need. So when you're sitting in this room on a Sunday morning, every bit of that Hammond organ sound is coming out of the Leslie speaker. I don't need to amplify it and have it coming out of those speakers. Same thing, interestingly, with the electronic instruments. Those are coming out of a speaker there, which is doubling as their monitor, and the whole sanctuary is getting the keyboard and bass out of that speaker. But that means I have to, so that's sound reinforcement. Those are already filling the space. What do we reinforce? The voices. We're miking up the pastor, we're miking up the people doing the announcements, we're miking up a soloist. Also in most of our spaces, we're not actually having to amplify the choirs. The choirs, as it turns out, are pretty good at being loud all on their own in spaces that are this size. So we don't need it. That's sound reinforcement. We're taking what is needed to match the level and make it audible all the way through the room, but mostly it's amplifying voices to match the levels of the music that's already coming out of speakers up there. Now, when it comes time to do audio for video, if I were just taking the stuff that we would have been using for a normal Sunday morning, what would we be missing? We normally wouldn't have the Leslie speaker mic'd up because I don't need to amplify it in the room. So normally, most of us don't have the organ mic'd up. So I've got to add those things. You basically have to ask yourself, for a viewer or a listener at home, what has to be captured and sent out that does not get amplified in this space? That was the biggest challenge. So we've got to make sure we're getting a balanced mix of everything that's making noise that we want to capture, and that's going to specifically include things we never want to have coming out of those speakers. And so that's what we do. And there's a couple of ways to do it. I'm not going to get into, and also, by the way, so this particular venue has choir mics. Just because they're so close to the monitors, they would generate feedback very easily if we use them for amplification, and we don't need them for amplification. If we have a soloist, the soloist is holding a wireless handheld. That's what I've seen at all of your churches. So I use these only for the live stream. If you're listening to the choir, you will hear the choir in beautiful stereo because they're being picked up by those microphones, even though those microphones are not coming through the house speakers. Make sense? Because I got to make sure we can hear them and hear them well. And then if we have a soloist or a featured vocalist who's on a handheld mic, I'm adding that into the mix as well. I can see the nods, so you sort of realize what I'm saying. Oh yeah, audio for video is a little bit different. It's adding some stuff to it. And I have to be able to do both. Also, the last thing on earth any of us need in the space is to make those drums any louder. But you see a microphone up there, and there's a second one, and it is a bass drum, kick drum microphone that is literally in the kick drum. So I had to add a total of 4 additional microphones. The choir mics were already built in, but to get our live stream fully up and running, I had to add an upper Leslie and a lower Leslie. Why is that? Because the speaker has 2 horns. We got an upper horn, and they spin, as it turns out. So the other thing is, I didn't realize there's going to be wind noise to deal with. But if you put the microphones close enough to really get the sound the way you want it, you've got to also deal with making sure it's shielded for wind noise. So we've got several different things. So this says everything that I just said. But the Leslie speaker, those top vents, those bottom vents, 2 sets of horns. So what's the other issue? You need to have microphones that are very directional because there's a lot of noise happening in that corner on a Sunday morning. And I need the live stream people to hear what's coming out of the upper Leslie horn and the lower Leslie horn without getting too much other extraneous noise. And there is a lot of it happening there. We got stage monitors that are close to there. We have humans making noises they probably wouldn't intend to have on the live stream. There's just a lot going on. And so it's important to place the microphones right against the thing that you're miking. But if you do that on a Leslie speaker, you may have to put a windshield on it. And secondly, you've got to use microphones that are the appropriate type for that use. So for example, I have a short shotgun that's aimed right into the top of that Leslie. And there is a condenser microphone, a different style at the bottom. The different style at the bottom has a windscreen, but it has a better bass response. And then the 2 of those each occupy a channel on the soundboard. But yeah, you don't want anything that's going to grab any more extraneous noise than you have to, and you want to get as close as you possibly can. And as I said, when capturing the choir, we've got, why does it keep skipping? There we go. We're using permanently installed choir mics. You don't have to do that if you don't already have choir mics hanging in your venue. Just make strategic use of your wireless handheld microphones. Those are super useful. Many of your choir members already do this without thinking about it. Renaya's mom is a fixture in the choir here, and man, does she have some pipes. But if she's not the one who is supposed to be coming right out across the top, and the one that's coming out across the top is Sister, what's her name? Yellow mic? Oh, you're not even going to say it. But anyway, well, yeah, but anyway, if you have somebody who's not doing a solo in that moment, normally they're pretty good about pulling the mic back. And if you've got 3 or 4 wireless handhelds that are being held, or just stick the cheapest stands and have 2 or 3 of those there, these are directional. And again, if we're not amplifying those in the moment, in the room, but we're just using it to pick up the live stream, these will work fine. So one of the things I hope you're detecting is this isn't all about buying new stuff. An awful lot of what I have sought to do here did not require buying new stuff. It was how can we use the infrastructure we already have to make something not just good, not just okay, amazing, as close to perfect as possible. And the difference between what we crank out here on our live stream and an actual broadcast television studio is minuscule. The difference is so small, it just doesn't even matter. There's a few different ways to make this happen. I was able to use the board we already had, not get a different board. But there's basically at least 3 ways to make this work. Remember, I said it has to be a different mix because you're bringing in stuff for the live stream that you're not going to amplify in the space. That means, by definition, you must have a different mix for the live stream than what goes to your house speakers. Most of your soundboards have auxes, and auxes are most commonly used. So in this case, aux 1, aux 2, aux 3, aux 4. It lets each monitor get a different custom mix because the organ player needs to hear something different than what the vocalists need to hear, and the pastor wants to hear something different than either of them. So all of your boards, almost all of them, something that's, and this has been around for years, so it's not like it has to be anything new or state of the art. You may very well have a board with 6 or 8 auxes, and here we're using 4 of them. So you could go in and do an aux out. That's a custom mix. That won't be in stereo, but it is a custom mix. Or you may have the ability to use groups. That's what I've done. So we can do a stereo mix for the live stream. That has worked very, very well. Or option 3, which is going to be a little more complicated, does not mean you're buying a very expensive mixer. Does not have to be an expensive mixer. But option 3 is every mixer, wherever a signal goes into the board, there's an output for that same signal. So you can just jumper all of the signals that you need to a separate mixing board and use a separate board for the live stream. What does that mean? Ooh, that's... So I don't know. I'll have to look what iRigging is. So kudos to you for stumping the presenter. But you can do, basically you want to find a way, because you need most of every channel that goes on the live stream, every channel that goes in the house speakers is needed for the live stream, and the live stream needs a few more besides that. So you can go to a second board, and for example, I have a small digital mixer that I'll use out in the field at events. That can be controlled with an iPad. So in a perfect world, somebody's monitoring the audio outside of this room because it's really hard to know what's going through the live stream if my ears are in the same space that's generating all the noise. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. Many of them capitalize on technology that we already have. Very last thing on tonight's slide deck. You got to have the ability to monitor it. You got to know what's going on, what's going out the door. So you, at a minimum, and this can be pretty inexpensive, but at a minimum, you got to have sound isolating. That's what these $52 ones are. They're going to clamp hard on somebody's head. You're not paying for anything electronic. You're not going to have anything super expensive. They'll block out noise so you can hear what's going on. That's the cheap option. The more expensive option is grab a $350 pair of really, really, really nice noise-canceling headphones. And the fourth option is listen outside the space using cheap headphones. If you just set this stuff up so that you were listening and monitoring it in the next room, in a different room, like for example, Salem, your booth is pretty isolated, and you could potentially have somebody that's not even in that open window, but they're already not being bombarded by the full magnitude of the audio like we are in one open space. So you got to be able to monitor it, because if you can't monitor it, you can't adjust it properly. I can look at the levels because I can see a visual on the levels and make sure they're in the zone, but I still have to be able to hear, is the mix good? Did I leave those choir mics up after the choir was done? Because if I did, they then make Pastor Parks have a lot of echo. I got to remember, and it never fails. Every time I put the headphones down, I realize 5 minutes later, well, shoot. By not wearing the headphones and monitoring continuously, I lost track of the fact that I left that set of microphones up, and I needed to bring those down so that the pastor's voice sounded much more much more crisp without the extraneous noise. So the monitoring is the last thing there. That's everything I got for tonight. And before you all take off, I am a nerd for all seasons. I am interested in what you want to talk about because I have this slot for the next 2 nights. So what do you want to talk about the next couple nights? Box, you mean as counter product? I haven't researched what other products there are. I do know Boxcast just bought a competitor in the space that is specific to houses of worship. So I know it's become a huge market share player. One of the things that I think we as a collective of churches want to stay sensitive to is, I didn't come in here having any experience with that video switcher. In fact, I had already worked out a totally different live casting solution doing a software-based video switching system. But this is so much better for so many reasons. And the more of us are using a similar setup, the more we have the brain trust to be able to help troubleshoot each other's issues. Because when you think about it, we don't want to have a relatively small cluster of churches, none of whom have dedicated technology, full-time, 24/7 tech people. We want to be able to call our counterpart at the other congregation and say, hey, I'm having this issue on this particular, and the more of that stuff we have in common, the better it is for all of us, I would say. So just a thought. Doesn't mean that anyone's ever limited, and certainly we don't want it to limit, there's a new product or a platform that we think actually makes more sense and one of us is going to try it. Don't let it stifle innovation, but if there's a really well-worn path, it's easier when we're not the only one on the path. As you can tell, my journey here has been an interesting one. But this stuff is very nerdy. The setup of it is very nerdy. The operation of it, not at all. But it's also very personal. Like I said, if we do this right, we are creating an experience that is as close to being in the space as you can possibly get.